Sabine, please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you Abdel for the introduction, and thanks also to Flanders Make for organizing a webinar like this, which perfectly fits into the Flanders AI research program. I will give a short context on where Flanders AI research program, how it's situated in the overall AI Flanders program by the Flemish government, and I will shortly introduce our activities that are related to Industry 4.0. So yeah, in Flanders we are quite ambitious when it relates to artificial intelligence, and also the Flemish government wanted to support some of these ambitions. And a very short-term one looks into how can we increase the adoption of AI in companies and at organizations. But in fact, the ambitions are a bit broader. We are looking into how can we, as Flanders, be innovative, how can we support economical growth, and also looking at a bit from the other way around, not necessarily here is AI, where can we apply it, but also looking at the important challenges we have in society, how to tackle them, and how can AI be of help in these. So for this, the Flemish government has in 2019 started the AI Flanders program. It has 3 pillars. The first is research, because we believe that research is essential in the long-term innovation, and so the Flanders AI research program has been founded. Secondly, also it's important to have implementation of AI at companies and organizations. So VLAIO is also supporting companies with funding, with awareness training, with help on business models. And there are also some other supporting activities that relate to education and training with the Flemish AI Academy. Some activities related to citizen awareness, citizen participation, and also the ethical and legal aspects are very important, and that's where the Knowledge Center Data and Society takes care of. And all this, we do in close collaboration with the different partners in the ecosystem. And so within the Flanders AI research program, we have the 5 Flemish universities. We also have the 4 strategic research centers and series. The whole program is coordinated by imec, but we are together with 10 partners. And we work together, as I said, with the other partners, with government, also with industry, through Agoria and VOCA, who are facilitating organizations, but also in direct collaboration with you. So what are then the choices we make? What are the challenges we are looking at? And there are some challenges that are aligned with our ambitions in Flanders and also in Europe for a digital future for Flanders and Europe. And also we want to focus on the strengths that exist in Flanders. And so high level, we have 3 main categories of topics we are looking into. We are looking into human-centric AI. Here comes, for instance, the topic of trustworthy AI, collaboration between people and machine. Secondly, also a very important problem or challenge is the one of sustainable AI, topic of energy-efficient AI. And thirdly, it's not only about AI on big data. It can also do AI on small data. And by having smart combinations of AI and within AI on combinations of data, knowledge, learning, experience, and so on, you can call it data-efficient AI. We can look also in collaborating AI systems to help into that. So high level, these are some topics we are looking into, and these translate then to generic technological research challenges that we take up in the Flanders AI research program. And more in detail, we call them grand challenges. We are doing the research on systems that can take complex decisions that are trustworthy, explainable, as I mentioned, without big data and so on. Energy efficient solutions, that AI that can operate in the edge. How can different AI systems collaborate in the execution of complex tasks? How do machines and AI systems collaborate seamlessly with people? And all this applied in some application areas that are important for Flanders, healthcare, industry, and also some applications for government and citizens. So that's what we do in the program, all with the goal of short-term and longer-term, the increased adoption of AI. So it means that we are really looking for the uptake of our research in companies and organizations. And one mechanism we have for that is what we call the demonstrators. And with those demonstrators, we want to demonstrate that the research that is being developed or as a result, it can be applied in these applications. We show the application of it, and with this we want to inspire you to also uptake this research into other domains, well, in the same domains or in other domains. And also here from the companies, if there are any new or other research challenges that we should take up, so that we kind of really have a flywheel of continuous research and application of the AI. So if we then look concretely in industry, manufacturing industry, energy, what are the use cases or applications we are looking into? And if that would be a kind of a visual on the future manufacturing plant, we are looking at optimization of flexible production lines. It's one of the major topics of this webinar, but there's a whole series of webinars, and in the coming sessions you will also hear about our other applications or use cases, which can be control of a machine park. Also the AGVs, having robust and instructable AGVs. How can we also control robotic arms, collaborative robotic arms? How can we assist, how can an AI system assist an operator in, for instance, an assembly task? So the operator in interaction with the AI system is a very recurring topic. But also other topics like real-time monitoring, anomaly detection, prognostic health management, and also a webinar is coming up on that in June. But I showed the manufacturing plant, but the same can apply to energy, where we are looking into prognostic health management of wind turbines, and not only industrial machine, but also wind turbines, or also at fleet-based control of wind turbines. The fact that we are looking at generic research, I like to illustrate it with these two illustrations. So what do they have in common? And we are on the one hand looking at wind turbines and monitoring wind turbines. And what you see to the right is the use case that we have in healthcare. It's about the detection of epileptic seizures, and where we have a sensor or medical wearable device that measures signals of the patients. And both cases really give research challenges that are genetic and that are common. Yeah? It's about the analysis of the, anomalies, for instance, in time series. It's sensing. It's about AI in the edge. So it really shows that the genetic research challenges that we are tackling can really be applied to various applications. But let's go further into this series of which we have the first webinar today. So the use of AI for smart manufacturing and smart monitoring. If you want to know more about our other use cases, you can visit our website, follow us on LinkedIn, or just send us a message. And I hope you enjoyed the rest of the talks on this webinar.
Okay, thank you, Sabine, for your nice introduction. So we are a bit ahead in time, but I propose already maybe to move to the next presentation, which is entitled Gaussian Processes to Support Data-Driven Process Parameter Selection and Adhesive Bonding Case Study. So this presentation is going to be given by a duo of Dries Verhees and Jeroen Jordens and Ivo Couckuyt. So Jeroen Jordens is working as a research engineer in the Join-in and Material Lab at Flanders Make. He has a PhD in chemical engineering, and he has strong expertise in adhesive bonding processes. He is combining this knowledge with digitalization technologies such as digital twins or AI. Dr. Ivo Couckuyt is a postdoctoral researcher in the ID lab of Ghent University. He got also PhD degrees in engineering from Ghent University in 2013, and his main research is on surrogates modeling, data efficient machine learning, and digital twins applied to various engineering problems. So Jeroen and Ivo, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for this nice introduction. So I'm Jeroen Jordens, and the topic of the talk today is, as Abdel mentioned, so the fast data-driven process parameter selection via Gaussian processes. Now, why did we apply this AI technology on a process, so an adhesive bonding process? The reason is that we see a trend towards more customized production, so customized mass production and more complex and personalized products. This is enabled by new and more complex process technologies like 3D printing, like humans that can interact with robots, or like adhesive bonding processes where you can have more complex designs. The downside of this new technologies is that it costs a lot of time to find the optimal process parameters because they're more complex. And also you need to do it more often because it's personalized products, so the design can change from product to product. That's also what we're facing in the Joining and Materials lab at Flanders Make. So in this lab, we help companies or customers which have questions regarding adhesive bonding processes. For example, if they want to join material A with material B, then we can guide them with selecting the proper adhesive or with designing the joint. But also we perform their process optimization, where we really optimize the adhesive bonding process, all the parameters, not only on a lab scale, but also on an industrial scale. We have several industrial robots like the one you see here, which we use for this purpose. And in the end, we can also do validation, so also the real testing of the pieces. Now, what we see is that during this process optimization, it takes a lot of time to find the optimal solution. So in order to tackle that, we're using different approaches within Flanders Make. So one is automation and operator support. Another one is Industry 4.0. And AI is one of these technologies, and that will be the topic of the talk today. So here we want to enhance process optimization of an adhesive bonding process with the use of AI. So how do we currently perform process optimization? So without AI. So we first start from the customer problem. So for example, if they have an adhesive bonding of two PPS materials, two plastic materials, we look at, okay, in what application will this product be used? And based on the problem, we define objective and constraints. Example is, for example, that it can be bonding stress of minimum 8 megapascal, standard deviation below a certain threshold, and no visual damage, for example, as a constraint. Then next step is that we select appropriate processes, parameters, and a suitable range. So if you look at the adhesive bonding process on the high level, then it consists of 3 main steps. So first is that you prepare the materials, the substrates. The second is that you also prepare the adhesive. And the last one is that you join everything together so that you create a product assembly. Now, within each of these steps, you can have several sub-steps. For example, surface treatment, where you really prepare the surface of the material. But to do that, you can do that in different ways. You can use several processes. You can do laser treatment, grinding, grid blasting, plasma treatment, for example. So what we then do is, okay, we say, okay, for PPS, for example, plasma treatment is a preferred process. Once we know that, then we move further, and then we select parameters which we think are useful to optimize. So in this case, we selected 6 parameters, and we also define a range in which we think, okay, in this range, the optimal will be positioned. Now, if we would test all the possible combinations of all the 6 parameters with all the ranges, it would be a huge amount of combinations that's infeasible to test. So that's the real challenge here in the situation that we have a huge amount of parameters. And now you will see a poll popping up on your screen that's asking what is your biggest problem in process optimization. You will see several options. So it can be that as well you have too many parameters. It can be that you have too little experts or too little sensors, or that the measurements technologies are not there. It can be lack of digitalization. Maybe you have too much data, which makes it difficult to process everything and analyze it. Or maybe it's another option. So I will give you a little bit of time to vote for this. So if I look at the screen right now, it's the 2 most common ones are too much parameters and too little expert or expertise. So yeah, it seems that the parameters is still a significant issue for a lot of you. So that will also be the topic of the talk today, so that will be interesting, I guess. So how do we normally, without AI, tackle this issue? What we do is we perform quick intermediate experiments. So these are called contact angle measurements, and they can give an indication about the optimal solution. What they do is they can exclude certain conditions which are absolutely not optimal, but the downside is that they do not consider all the effects of plasma. So it can be that you're missing the optimal solution in the end. But we select them because doing the real validation experiments, so really gluing two parts together and testing them in the end in a tensile bench, that's too costly. It's about 10 euros per sample. So performing a lot of experiments would be too costly. So that's why we perform these contact angle measurements. Then we select possible optimal solutions based on the results, and then we still do the validation experiments to really confirm that the conditions that we selected are still okay or not. To perform the full validation experiments, we perform plasma, we do the full bonding process, we bond really two pieces together and perform a tensile test in the end. Now, it often happens that in the end, the conditions are not met, so the requirements are not met. So then we need to rethink experiments. We need maybe to select additional parameters or extend the range. So we need to do another iteration, and then only if we're satisfied, then we propose our final solution to the customer. Now, the downside is, like I mentioned, that validation experiments are really costly, that contact angle measurements only provide an indication. And the main cost is in the interpretation of the results and in planning. So that's a lot of huge cost factors. So if we can reduce that, that would be very beneficial. And there are several iterations needed. So and you don't know upfront how many you need. So there is need for a tool to find the optimum with less experiments and get an idea about the confidence on the final result. So that's in the topic of the data efficient AI, like Sabine mentioned before. So that's what we're working on right now. So together with University of Ghent and UHasselt, we're working on a kind of process optimization toolbox where we feed in, these are the parameters we want to optimize. This is the range in which we expect the optimum. And then this process optimization toolbox will tell you, okay, now perform these validation experiments. It will select them in a clever way. You feed back the results, and then you get an idea about the confidence. It will provide new experiments to perform, etc. You do several iterations till you're satisfied with the final result, and then you can propose a final solution to the customer. And the goal is that we reduce the time to find this optimal solution with AI. And build a tool which can support the adhesive expert in finding good process parameters, and also with finding trade-offs between, for example, the product performance, like the strength, and the production cost in the end. But how this works, that will be something that will be explained by my colleague Ivo in the next slides.
Yeah, thank you, Jeroen. So my name is Ivo Couckuyt. I'm from the ID Lab research group of Ghent University, and I will be explaining about data efficient process optimization. These results are in collaboration with the group of Inneke Van Nieuwenhuyse from the University of Hasselt. So how do we currently search in process optimization? Often classical design of experiments are used, but the problem there is that if you choose too few experiments, then the optimum will not be included, and you will have to create a new design of experiments. Or if you choose the design of experiments to be too big, too many experiments, then you will take more time than is needed to find the optimum. And this is often combined in a trial and error fashion, where you do one design of experiments, analyze the results, and then you do a completely new design of experiments in another area, for instance, to try and find the optimum. A better way is using Bayesian optimization. So Bayesian optimization can be seen as some kind of adaptive or sequential design of experiments, where you just start from a very small design of experiments on the left, maybe only 5 experiments, and then you start collecting more data where it's needed. So after a couple of iterations, we can see that we choose more data in the center of the process space, the input space, and at the end we sampled more around a certain location, in this case to find the optimum. So Bayesian optimization, it's a data efficient optimization method, and the sampling, so choosing the sequential design of experiments, is based on using machine learning models. So the machine learning model drives the selection of the next experiment. So just to give you an overview of Bayesian optimization, so it starts from a very small design of experiments. Really, typically it's only 5 or 10 experiments. You perform those experiments, of course, and then based on that data set, you can create your first machine learning model. This model can predict, for instance, where the next most optimal process parameter combination is located. So you select additional experiments based on that model, perform new experiments, and then you can update that model in the next iteration to make it more accurate. And this process continues until you have found, with few amount of experiments, found a good process parameter combination. So we are building an optimization toolbox for this, which is a web browser-based toolbox where you can generate the first design of experiments in the first step, which you can use to carry out those experiments. So it will generate an Excel sheet with all the parameter combinations that you have to execute. After you have done the experiments, you can upload the results of those experiments, so the tensile strength or the production cost, back to the tool. And then the tool can suggest new experiments for you to do. So using Bayesian optimization, using machine learning and artificial intelligence, and based on the data you have input so far, it will build a model and it will suggest in a smart way the next experiment that will likely lead to the most optimal combination with a minimum number of experiments in total. So just to give you a small idea of how it works. So let's say that we want to minimize this function. So the black line is the objective function you want to minimize, but we don't know this function, of course. We can only sample it. So we have 2 samples at the start. Based on those 2 samples, we can build our first machine learning model. In this case, it's a Gaussian process, which has a prediction, the blue line, but also a confidence. And this confidence is an estimation of the uncertainty at each prediction point X. And it's very useful for decision making and for sampling. Because based on this prediction and this confidence, so based on the blue line and the confidence, we can build a so-called acquisition function, which indicates how interesting a certain point is to sample, or how interesting a certain experiment is to do next. So in this case, we can see that on the right side, it's not very interesting to sample. But here in the middle, on the red line, it's the most interesting region, and we want to take the next experiment in that location. After we have done that experiment, we can update the model, and you can see that the uncertainty, the confidence of the model changes. So it will be very confident around the new data point, but less confident on the right side, for instance. And then again, we can see using the acquisition function where we want to sample. On the right side, it's interesting, but on the left side, it's even more interesting in this case. And so we can continue this process, reducing the uncertainty of the model and finding the optimum. So that after a couple of iterations, we can see that we are starting to zoom in to the right side of the objective function, of the input space, where the actual minimum is located. So in this method, we have implemented this in the AI toolbox, the web-based toolbox. And we validated it first on deterministic simulations. So instead of using experiments, we used a simulation instead. We want to optimize 6 process parameters with respect to the break stress, break strength of the bonding. But we only have 100 simulations to do this. We can see at the bottom plot, we can see the evolution of the break stress for the current optimum over the number of iterations or over the number of simulations we have done so far. We can see that our method quickly increases, so higher is better. So we really find a good optimum only after 80 simulations, or about 100 in total. But other methods like the standard optimization method in MATLAB, you can see that it increases very slowly. So after 100 simulations, it's still much worse than our method. If you would let this run until 500 simulations, it will actually find the optimum that we also have found with our method around here. But of course, 500 simulations, it's a factor 10 slower than our method. So yeah, it's really about data efficiency and reducing the time to find the optimum. We also applied this. We also used multi-objective optimization on the simulation. So instead of only optimizing the brake stress, we also take the production cost into account. And there you can see that we have a Pareto front as a solution, not only one solution, but a whole Pareto front, where if you have a certain production cost that you can sacrifice, that you can reduce the production cost, but then you sacrifice the brake stress of the bonding. And if you compare it to other algorithms, so our algorithm is the orange dots, the orange circles. If you compare it, for instance, to the blue squares, that takes a lot more simulations. It's about a factor 10, 15 more simulations that it would take to find a similar Pareto front as our method.
Okay, so we performed this now, or we tested this method now on simulations. And the idea that we also had is, okay, now we're starting also to check it on real life experiments where we really bond two pieces together and really to perform the tensile test in the end. So what we did here was we first constructed a small design of experiments with 30 different parameter settings. Then we performed the real life validation experiments. In total, we did 150 data points. And we also tested them, and we're now updating or creating the model, the machine learning model. We didn't close the cycle yet, so we didn't select additional experiments yet. We didn't do multiple iterations, but what we already did was we looked at, okay, what is the cost analysis or the cost benefit. So on the one hand, we compared production costs, so the cost to produce one piece of this assembly. So we looked at materials cost, operator time, machine time, energy, etc. And on the other hand, we also looked at what is the cost to find the optimal solution based on the engineering time to design experiments, to analyze results, but also on the cost to perform the experiments. And what we see up to now, we didn't complete the cycle yet. We already saw a significant advantage by using the AI approach. So what we did was we compared the approach that Ivo explained before with a traditional approach where we use the contact angle measurements. And what we see is that we can receive a 2% reduction in production cost already with 50% lower cost to find the optimal solution. So this indicates that this AI approach is can show significant advantages. And we hope, of course, that we can reduce this production cost even further, while we still keep into account that this cost to find optimal solution will not be too large, of course. So as a conclusion, we can state that this AI-based process optimization has been validated on simulations, and we saw a factor 10 times speed up there. And we're also busy with testing it now on real-life experiments, and also there we see already a significant advantage, even if we didn't complete the cycle yet. The future plan is to complete the cycle, validate the AI approach also on these measurements, and also to incorporate constraints, like, for example, if we have visual damage, that we should exclude these samples, and also include measurement uncertainty. And finally, the end goal for Flanders Make would be that we create a kind of AI-supported joining a materials lab. So there, the idea is that we do not only focus on process optimization, so the box on the right, but also that we use AI in the steps before it. So right now we're working on defining objective and constraints based on AI. So we created there an adhesive selector tool, which can, for example, suggest possible adhesives based on inputs that you provide. So for example, if you tell, okay, I need an adhesive which with a strength of at least 10 megapascal, and it should work in a temperature range of 10 degrees Celsius till 40 degrees Celsius, for example, and I have other constraints, then this tool can look in a database of adhesives and use AI to suggest possible adhesives which can satisfy these conditions. And the other way around, you can also select an adhesive and then it can tell you, okay, this is for example, the temperature range in which you can apply the adhesive or the timings, etc. We're also applying this tool for a second approach where we want to select appropriate processes, parameters, and the range. So that's a similar one. And these tools, the nice thing is also that it can capture expert knowledge. So if you have 2 little experts, for example, like a few of you indicated in the poll, this tool is also an interesting tool so that it can capture expert knowledge and put it informally into kind of AI-based tool. And finally, in the end, we're also working on automation and digitalization of the lab so that we connect all equipment to the cloud, for example, that we use automation so that, for example, the validation experiments can be performed in an automatic way. And in that way that we can reduce the cost to find an optimum solution or perform process optimization in the end.
Okay, so thank you very much, Jeroen and Ivo, for this interesting presentation. Just to remind, in case there are questions, please address them in the chat or take note of them that you can address them in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So there will be a Q&A session where we can have or take your questions and also have some discussions about the topics of the webinar today. So the next presentation is going to be about additive manufacturing. So the title of the presentation is Monitoring Solutions to Allow Adaptive Process Control for 3D Metal Printing. It's going to again to be given by 2 colleagues, so Brian Booth and Dries Verhees. So Brian Booth goes a PhD in computing science from Simon Fraser University in 2015. He is now a researcher in the Vision Lab at the University of, he has spent 4 years as a researcher in the Vision Lab at the University of Antwerp, and he is currently working in the Image Processing and Interpretation Lab at the University of Ghent. His research interest focused into computer vision techniques for industrial inspection and computer-aided diagnosis. Dries Verhees is a researcher engineer at Flanders Make. He received his Master of Mathematical Engineering at the University of Leuven, and he has worked several years as an engineer on digitalization and process automation projects. He is also working on monitoring and control activities, mainly also for additive manufacturing processes. So Brian and Dries, please go ahead.
Thank you, Abdel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dries, and together with Brian, I will present to you some monitoring solutions for 3D metal printing that will allow you to control your process and improve the quality. So as Jeroen already indicated in the previous presentation, we do see an industrial trend towards more customized production. So there is a growing industrial interest in additive manufacturing as it enables the flexibility for production of a complex shape and complex parts. In order to support this growth, the additive manufacturing industry needs to be able to deliver defect-free parts at a low production cost. So before diving into the challenges, I would first bring you all on the same page and briefly explain what is additive manufacturing. So additive manufacturing, it is a group of techniques that allow you to create objects or build objects layer by layer, starting from a computer design. So a designer designs an object in software, and this CAD drawing is then sent to an additive manufacturing machine to build the object layer by layer. There are several techniques and materials available, and during this presentation we will focus on one technique, which is the powder bed fusion technique, where a high power density laser will fuse metallic powder to actually build the object layer by layer, as you can see in the movie in this slide. So this technique is very, very popular. It's used, for example, in medical industry to create medical parts like implants. It's also used in machine components, for example, turbine blades and other applications, or functional parts in aerospace. In all of these categories, they require products with high quality. So especially in, for example, medical, but also in aerospace, quality is very important. And if the object does not satisfy the quality requirements, it will be rejected. But what we see in additive manufacturing is that often products with reduced quality are obtained. And by reduced quality, it can be many kinds of defects. I show here as an example 3 kinds of defects. It can be cracks in your objects. It can be warping due to thermal stress. It can also be porosity. And all of these defects, they lead to scrap because the objects or the produced parts are rejected. And this leads to high scrap rates and hence high costs. As you can see on the right-hand side graph, if we're able to reduce the scrap rate, we're also able to drastically reduce the costs of production of the part. So there is a need for a quality assurance system in additive manufacturing. And before going to some solutions, I would ask you if you are confronted with quality assurance challenges in your process. So you should see a poll at the moment, and either you of course don't have these challenges, but you might have these challenges and already have implemented a solution, or you have these challenges and at the moment you have no way to deal with it in an automatic way. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to complete the question. So it's good news that none of you, or now one of you, or a couple of them, do have quality assurance issues, but no solutions. And some of you have solutions, and others don't see quality. So it's a bit a mix of both. But at least for those that have experience or see quality issues in their process, this could be very interesting for you. So the process itself. So the additive manufacturing process, it has many inputs. You have, for example, machine parameters. So actually the printer that you have and its configuration. This is typically constraints. These are typically constraints. You also have the material properties. These are definitely constraints because you need to take a certain material and you can't change the material properties of that material. On the other hand, you have the input, the requirements, the design requirements, so the geometry of the object. And you have scanning parameters. And scanning parameters, we mean the settings of the laser that is traveling. So for example, the path that the laser is traveling, the speed of the laser, the power of the laser, and many more. And what we know is that speed and power, they actually have a big influence on the energy in the melt pool. So the energy that you use to melt the powder for solid material. And this energy is highly correlated with the porosity that we see in the object. And due to uncertainties and disturbances that we have into the process, we know that one set of parameters, it's not sufficient. We do need to adjust these parameters to changing environments during the print process. And that's what we will focus on during this talk. So how was it done nowadays? If you, for example, want to print something or want to go into additive manufacturing, you buy a printer of one of the suppliers. And basically you get a printer, but you still need an expert that will control and configure this printer. And the expert needs to know, for example, the material that you're printing. He or she needs to know the machine with all its constraints and functions. He or she also needs to know the design that you're printing, because the design will have an influence on the quality and the parameters. And based on the expert knowledge, he or she will define the most optimal process parameters for that particular print, and then the print is executed in the machine. At the end of the print, the expert will inspect the the product, or we'll do an offline CT scan or Archimedes test to inspect the quality. And based on that, based on the achieved quality, the expert will decide to change the parameter for the next print. So this, of course, as you can guess, this leads to a lot of trial and errors during production, and hence a high scrap rate, which is not desired. But also, if there is a new material or a very complex design, that's typically takes some time. So you have slow integration of these kind of things because the expert is always in the loop with some trial and error. But nowadays, many machine builders, they offer monitoring solutions into their machine as an add-on. So you can install additional monitoring in your machine, and this monitoring will give you an indication of the part quality or critical events that are happening during the print. But still, as it gives only an indication of the quality and events, the actual interpretation of what is truly happening and what are the actions that are required is still left to the user. So it actually gives the expert additional info, but the decisions, whether to abort the print or whether to change parameters, is still up to the expert. And also, since the expert is in the loop, online control of these parameters is very limited or hardly possible, because you still need an expert in the loop, and the process is very fast. I haven't mentioned it before, but the laser is typically controlled at 100 kilohertz. It's moving at 1 meter per second. So no human can be in the loop in order to change parameters. So what we will present is actually the next step, where we are going to guide the production and the process by artificial intelligence. So we will put in place an online quality assessment tool that will give an online assessment and with direct feedback into the process. Hence, the process itself can run automatically, and the expert involvement is only needed at machine commissioning. And this will lead to, of course, less iterations and hence lower scrap rates. So here you see the three possible ways of our methods or steps in order for a production. So my question to you is, okay, if we look to your process, where are you today? Are you fully relying on experts? Do you have some monitoring in place? Or do you have already monitoring with artificial intelligence that will finally guide your production or process? Let's see if there are already some results. So we see again at the moment that 50% of the people that have voted, they have monitoring already, and that's good, but they still need some expert in the loop to address the issues and look into the monitoring signals. So to continue about around this topic, production guided by AI. So what we will propose for the additive manufacturing, but it's applicable to many other processes, is actually two blocks. On the one hand, we have the sensing, so the monitoring, which is typically already to a certain extent in place. We've made an artificial intelligence tool that will allow to run this sensing online. So in our case, it's at 100 kilohertz. That will do at 100 kilohertz online a quality assessment, and will actually build up a quality model online and gives real-time quality indicators. These quality indicators are then taken up by the control unit, and based on that we will decide whether we need to change one of the parameters in order to achieve better quality. Next to that, we also have an offline loop, which I'm not going into much detail during this presentation, but offline from time to time, we analyze a printed object using, for example, X-ray or Archimedes test. Together with some artificial intelligence and classification, we use this as training and validation of the online modules, so the smart sensing and the smart control. So we will present to you two solutions. One solution is based on time series data. So here you see an overview of the print of the printer, where you have the laser and the scanner and the melt pool. So the scanner actually moves the laser. And next to that, we've installed a photodiode, which actually measures intensities on the build area, which gives time series. And so my colleague Brian has implemented some edge learning on time series, and he will go into much more detail.
Okay, thank you, Dries. So as we were saying, this edge learning problem we're dealing with needs a fast solution because it is running at 100 kilohertz. And so what we decided to do is to model this problem using anomaly detection, where we're just going to simply identify any abnormal behavior in the build process. And by modeling the problem this way, we don't really have to build a complicated model that includes all the factors that impact normal build behavior, all the factors that Dries mentioned earlier. Instead, what we can do is we can take the data from the first few layers of the build and train an AI model on that. And that model will be specific to that build job. And in particular, the AI model we're going to use is the one on the right here. Now, the input to that model will be the most recent series of photodiode signals, and those will be run through an autoencoder. Now, what the autoencoder will do is it will compress that data, which will force it to throw out any patterns that are rare or unusual in that data set. Then you'll take the compressed data and uncompress it. So what you get out at the end is a set of photodiode signals that represent normal build behavior. If we then take that output and compare it to the input, a large difference would indicate that something abnormal is going on, and that is a signal we can send to the machine to help control the machine's behavior. Next slide. So the other thing we have to worry about is another thing that Dries mentioned, in that the build environment is going to change over time. And that means that our AI model has to adapt to this and change on the fly. So what we really have to do is include active learning into our process here. And the way we do that is after each layer, we take the data collected from that layer and we retrain the AI model so that it can adapt to the most recent data. Now, given the speeds that we're working at, it's impossible to really do that training and the anomaly detection on the same machine, because they will compete for computing resources and slow each other down. So instead, what we do is we set up a distributed system like you see here on the right, where we have an edge machine that does the anomaly detection at very high speeds and informs the build machine. And then we have another computer that's connected to it that logs the data coming in and retrains the AI model so that it can be updated layer by layer. Next slide. So we took this concept and we tested it on a 3D build of a cylinder that you see in gray on the right here. And our anomalies that we detected are shown in blue. And what we saw is that the anomalies we detected tend to line up to layers that were created with an abnormal laser power in the machine. So this is good that we're seeing this correlation. Now, if we zoom in on a specific layer on the next slide, so we got a layer near the bottom here, we can see that the anomaly scores that we compute are rather high, and that's shown by the yellow and orange that we see in the image on the left here. Now, if we compare that same slice in the object to a CT slice of the same object, what we see are a lot of pores or voids in the object that was printed, and these are showing up in black here on the right. And so these are the types of defects we want to avoid. And so the fact that we're seeing the anomaly scores correlating with those defects gives us a decent indication that this type of an approach would be helpful for online control. So with that being said, I'll hand it back to Dries for the other system.
Thank you, Brian. So Brian has explained the solution 1 here, the edge learning on time series. And I will briefly talk about another solution which actually uses deep learning on images. And therefore we have installed a camera next to the laser that will actually take a high-speed video of the laser traveling on the build area. So the camera will follow the laser through the mirrors and record the high video stream. So the goal of this technique is actually to estimate and control the process parameter using this high-speed video. And as explained before, we know that the actual melting regime, it might deviate from the optimal one, and that could depend on, for example, material quality, so the metallic powder, the object design, but also unpredictable effects happening or events happening during the print, or fluctuating machine parameters that we're not aware of. And all of this will need to capture in the AI module. So the AI module will actually output the process deviation from the optimal melting regime. And this deviation can then be fed back into the process control in order to change the control variables. So this method works as follows. When there is a new machine or a new material, we are actually executing a kind of a calibration print or calibration period. And during this print, we print at different settings. So we have a number of settings. So here A, B, C, and many more. We collect some data for each setting. So for each setting, we actually have a short video stream. And this training data is then fed into a convolutional neural network to find features. So this network will learn how it can derive the system settings from this image by looking to certain patterns or deviations into the image. So we get actually a mapping from the recorded video frame onto system settings. So after training, if you want to test it, so here you see some results. So here we actually changed the power of the print, and in the first experiment on the top. On the left-hand side, you see the recorded video. So this is the raw video. And on the right-hand side, you see the predictions by the AI module. And what we see, if we increase the power, we see that the AI module predicts that the power is higher than optimal, and this is indicated by the orange color, but the speed is still optimal, indicated by the green color. So if we use this as input in the controller, we know that we need to change the power and keep the speed constant. On the other hand, if you, for example, change the speed by 200%, you also see here that the AI module predicts the power as being nominal, indicated by the green color, but the speed predicted too high. So we know if we see this kind of behavior, we know that the controller needs to reduce the speed in order to stay within the optimal parameter regime for getting optimal quality. So if you want to apply this technique on a machine, we actually, as mentioned before, will need to do a calibration print and train it once, and afterwards it will run continuously. Maybe over time we'll need some recalibration because of machine changes or material changes, but overall, once it's calibrated, it's ready to run. In order to speed up this process, especially if you have many machines or many materials, we can also apply transfer learning, that you can learn from the other machine such that you need less training time. And as I explained, the output of the module is actually a deviation from the optimal parameters, and this is then direct feedback for the controller. Of course, as is it research, there are still some items that are in progress. So at the moment, this is not yet fast enough for real-time control. So real-time control, we're talking about 20 kilohertz. At the moment, we can't get to that speed, although it's already applicable for layer-wise control. So layer-wise, it's each print layer, you adapt the settings for the next layer. Of course, we're still looking into speeding up such that we can achieve the desired or required frequency. As it works frame by frame, we don't consider at the moment any temporal information. Hence, it's a bit more noisy and less reliable. But this can be solved in a couple of ways, and we're still looking into that. And also testing it on new material, machines, and parameters is still ongoing. To finish this talk, so we've presented to you two techniques. One technique is an edge learning technique on time series, which requires some nominal reference at the start of a print, and then online adapts its model and it detects abnormal behavior. As it is working with features, it can be combined with process knowledge. So if you have an expert that has some process knowledge, it can be taken into account. On the other hand, we've also shown a deep learning technique where you don't need to have any process knowledge, or even you can't take it into account because it learns by itself. But you need only a single calibration at commissioning, and the output of this module gives actually direct feedback into the controller, as it actually gives the controllable parameters as output, the deviation of the controllable parameters. So to conclude, we've presented two solutions that have impact on additive manufacturing. So this will allow to produce 3D parts at higher quality, so hence less waste and improved productivity. We're currently looking if we can integrate multiple sources, so like sensor fusion. So we've presented two techniques independently, as they are looking to the same process. It's very interesting to merge them if you have both sensing techniques available. And also looking how we can speed up the training and the validation automatically. So I've presented this on an additive manufacturing case. Of course, this is applicable to other processes that need industrial monitoring. If you, for example, have sensing and you'll need to find the relation with the process, or you see a need for online monitoring of the process parameters to keep them stable, or you need some real-time quality assessment, this could be very interesting for those kind of challenges. And thank you all for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian and Dries, for this nice presentation. So it clearly highlights that cooperation can indeed leverage AI for manufacturing. So thank you very much. So I would propose to move forward. I see also a polling question. Maybe if you can vote it, that we can go forward to the next presentation. And next presentation is going to be given by an industrial partner, ML6. So the title of the presentation is how ML or how machine learning can improve efficiency and reduce carbon footprint of production processes. It's going to be given by Nicolas Deruyter, Managing Director of ML6. So maybe a short intro to Nicolas. So he founded ML6 in December 2012, and he is quite energized by realizing a meaningful impact as business, people, and society. He is speaker in multiple events covering topics from innovation to practical application. He also gives lectures at Vlerik Business School in the AI and Big Data program. So Nicolas holds his master in engineering, operation research, industrial engineering, and mechatronics from Ghent universities. Maybe also good to mention that ML6 is classified as in Trend Gazellen, which is in fact a kind of a classification of fast-growing companies. So Nicolas, please go ahead. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. So thank you for that. Can you guys see my screen? Can you just give a quick okay in chat if that's the case?
Okay. Yes, we do.
That's great. Thank you. So thanks again for the introduction. I changed a bit the content of the talk for today. mainly because we have quite a technical audience and I really wanted to focus on knowledge sharing. So more on that later. I just have one slide about the company. So indeed, I founded the company in December 2012 after I graduated as a civil engineer from Ghent University, and I have a background in electromechanics and operations research. So I did a thesis at Sapa Aluminium Extrusion, and there I used dynamic programming to optimize the production process. And with that project, I really fell in love by using data, using algorithms, just using a computer to really have substantial impact at businesses. So I went off and founded a company, hired a lot of smart people, much smarter people than myself, and we kept on growing. We apply machine learning in practice. According to Deloitte and trends, we're at least, we're growing quite fast, but we focus specifically only on applying machine learning based systems in the real life. And given my background, we tend to not focus on a specific industry, on a specific vertical. We work for banks, we work for hospitals, we work for manufacturing industry, chemical plants, and so on. But given my background, the most systems that we have running in production is in fact in the manufacturing vertical, around 25%, I believe. In 2018, we started doing model predictive control, some initiatives, mainly because we've seen some successes in research, and we started to try and apply that in practice as well. If you want to reach out to me, my email address is nicolas@ml6.eu. I'm happy to answer any additional questions. So to move forward, one of the things that we do really, really well at our company is manage our internal knowledge. We are a team of engineers, and we closely monitor and track different open source packages, tooling, and so on that we use in many different locations. So we can learn from it, and we can also really make a good decision for a specific problem, what is going to work and what is not going to work. For our customers that are really serious in our collaboration, this is something that we also open up and that we provide external access. And that's a really competitive advantage for us. The field of machine learning and AI, it's extremely fast. It's very difficult to keep up, and this really helps our tech radar. But more on that later. So for today, I wanted to share how we handle explainable AI in practice with specific practical examples. With a bit of a sustainability sauce on top of that. So instead of just showing you cases that we've done, I really wanted to share, like, look, these are the packages that we use. So you can really look at these and maybe even use them after this session. It's being an engineer myself, it's something, it's the type of content that I really like myself as well, rather than just some cases. So a bit of background, started in 2018, very naive. We wanted to do model predictive control in dynamic environments using reinforcement learning and so on. So we started, by now we have cases on cranes in dynamic environment. We work together with machine builders to create autonomous systems. We work on biogas plants and biomass reactors and so on. So quite broad, but we started very naive, meaning that, okay, we saw success by Google that applied reinforcement learning to their data centers, and we thought, hey, let's try and do that as well. But in reality, everyone wants you to stay the furthest away as you can from things that work quite well. So one of the big challenges that we had to solve in the beginning is explainability, because if you cannot explain what is going on or what the system is going to do, then you won't have any support base for adoption. So you need to be really, really good in that. So for today, again, I'm going to share how we tackle those issues, and hopefully it's really helpful. So when you dive into explainability, the first thing is to really be thoughtful about what's your goal for your explainability. So, and it's very dependent on your model performance. So when you start off with computer vision, you will create a convolutional neural network, you download the package from the internet, you create some training data, you label some images, and then you start, and it's very easy to get to an 80% accuracy. But it gets exponentially more difficult to get more accurate numbers. So in the very first phase, when your AI-based system is weaker than human level performance, transparency is all about, okay, where is the system failing and how can I do better? So the goal is to improve your ML-based system. Secondly, when you're over that phase, you're at a phase where your machine learning-based system is at the same level of human performance. So then you need to get adoption. Because if you don't have adoption, you're never going to get to phase 3. So in phase 2, it's about providing rationale. It's about providing trust with humans, with operators, with management, that the system is actually going to be able to do better, and the things that it's proposing does actually make sense. And then on the third step, when AI is stronger, it's typically being used to explain a very complicated concept, and the goal is to teach humans. So I have some examples in things like root cause analysis at the end of this session, which are quite interesting. So to follow my colleagues from Flanders Make, I would like to launch a poll. If you are already using machine learning in production or in research, which stage are you in at this moment in time? Is it 1, is it 2, is it 3? If you're not using anything at this moment in time, don't answer, but if you do, where are you right now? So I'm going to wait a couple of moments to see what the results are. Typically, what we see in practice is that the distribution is a very clear bell curve, meaning that the heavyweight is on the second part of adoption, basically. And what we see here, we have 4 responses, and we see a bit more tendency to be stronger than humans, which is super interesting, and which will really resonate with the content that I have at the end of this session. So moving forward, what I'm going to present are many different computational packages which you could use, but bear in mind that in the end, it's all about communicating what the model is doing or what it is going to do. And whether or not it is understood is defined by people, obviously not by algorithms. And the higher up the chain that you go, the more simpler and preferably the more visual your explanation should be. So to move forward, just a very brief explanation on how we're structured as a company. Our company, our delivery unit is structured within 6 knowledge domains. These are different knowledge departments, you could say. 3 of them are, so one is computer vision. So it's around quality control on video cameras and images. Second one is around language, natural language processing. So that's being able to read through information or doing stuff like speech to text in a Flemish language and so on. And then structured data is all about time series. It's all about data which is structured in a tabular format. And then we have like cross knowledge groups, ML in production and software architecture. And ML in production is basically all about, okay, for instance, explainability is one of the topics within ML in production. So these are really the people, the experts that know what comes into play when you have these kind of systems running in production. So for today, I'll have a bit of explainability at projects and some of the tooling. I'm not going to dive into the papers today, unfortunately. So to kick things off, there are 4 large design patterns that we use, which you could use as well. One is visualizations, if you can kind of show what the model is doing or what the model is thinking about, that helps in explainability. Second is interpretable models. Some models are completely black box and very difficult to understand what they're doing. Others are really, really easy, or are actually built for explainability. So choose your battle is in phase 2. Third one is causality. As we all know, correlation doesn't mean a causal effect, and there are specific tools to use to actually try and find those causal effects, which I'll explain later. And then the last one is transparency and transferability. If you have a computer vision model which works quite well on a production line in Belgium, for instance, This is not just a copy-paste to 100 different production lines. A machine learning model isn't transferable by definition. So there are tools to cope with that and to manage that if you need to scale out. So to dive right in terms of visualizations, there are three main things that we typically use. We're going to look at clustering or listing most similar examples. We're going to look at attention-based visualizations and dimensionality reduction. So in each of these three, I've added an example, a visual example for computer vision and one for structured data at the right. So for instance, the top right, listing most similar examples. The top right is a project that we've done in Formula 1. It's actually the front splitter of a Formula 1 car, and the dots that you see are pressure taps. And one of the things that we've done is anomaly detection on when these pressure taps tend to fail. And what really helped is providing a very visual way of showing very similar patterns for certain pressure tap behavior. And what you could see is that neighboring sensors actually behave the same way, but then also if we normalized by corner and by speed, we could see very similar behavior for actually pressure sensors on the other side of the wing. It's all common sense, but it really helps in visualizing this to provide that understanding. A second one is attention-based visualizations, and this is all about, okay, can we visualize the weights of your neural network to kind of see what the model is generalizing upon. So for instance, I don't know if you know this, but we created a virtual web developer, so a virtual news anchor some years ago using deepfake technology. And now we use a similar technology to actually detect a deepfake. So you might have seen the Tom Cruise one. So you can visualize the weights to kind of like understand how the model is actually detecting the difference between a real video and a fake video. So here you can very clearly see it's detecting the cutout face. And then we typically use quite a lot of dimensionality reductions as well. If you have an n-dimensional vector space, being able to just display it in 2 dimensions and then cluster, it provides an additional explainability as well. So I'm going to go a bit faster. One of the examples that we do this in practice is for a company that produces a tapestry. And these carpets, these rugs, if they come out of the machine, basically at the end, they need to be folded. They need to be folded and they need to be sewed. So you have a clear end product. And we were giving the challenge, like, look, okay, our current system is a Beltec one. We want to have a bigger accuracy because they are using traditional methods, and we know with machine learning and neural networks, this should be better. We were given the challenge that we can only use existing hardware, so no additional cameras, no additional computers, no additional GPUs, and we needed to do it in real time. So every, I think, 15 milliseconds, we need to give coordinates to the folding machine to actually fold the rug. So as I said before, it's quite easy to get to 80%. It's quite difficult, or it requires a bit of iterations to get higher. So one of the things that we did there, so here you can see an example, is a small video of how the prediction line is evolving. But one of the things that we've done there is specifically create a very small custom tool, which shows the accuracy and the likelihood in a visual way, in a clustered way. So the operator, which is at the machine day by day, he can really see, okay, what is going wrong and what is going right. And by doing this, by providing this visibility, we could identify a couple of scenarios that were happening. So one, the model makes mistakes. It hasn't seen enough training data. Secondly, the labels are wrong. So a very nice example is the one on the bottom left, where we could see that just the training data that we received was just plain wrong. And by showing that in a visual way, it really helped in understanding and creating a support base to further adopt the tool. We also had scenarios where the model outperformed, which is actually what we want. And we also had scenarios where we don't really know, okay, what is now the right line that we need to choose? And that's the case in the top left. So by providing this visibility and this interactivity to the operator, it helped him to understand what was going on and how to further improve the system. On the right, this is our very first carpet that we received when the model was completely released and completely running into production. It's not the prettiest one, but hey, it's in our office and we're very proud of it. So that's the first part. It's all about visualization. The second part is about interpretable models. So the first thing you can do is to decompose your model. And so it's you can find packages online, a computer vision model, you run it, and it's basically a black box to do everything. What's more interesting is that you take it, that you split it up into smaller subproblems. So imagine that you need to detect a giraffe on a picture. It's better then to detect, okay, let's start with whether or not this is a horse-like creature versus a something completely different, and then you dive deeper into a specific neural networks designed for detecting zebras, for instance. So one of the recent papers is neural back decision trees. There are many more. But that's quite interesting, and it's working quite well in practice and something we apply all the time. Knowledge graphs, I have a nice example following this slide, but by infusing a semantic database, it really helps in providing a language to certain anomaly detection rules, for instance. So what's typically in a production setting, typically what people really understand is things like, okay, if temperature decreases this amount, then we engage this compressor. And so by using knowledge graphs, you can store that information, but you can have, for instance, anomaly detection models that suggest new rules to be added to the semantic data store. And when you add them, it makes complete and perfect sense for the operator. Then we have problem reframing, where by changing the problem, you can maybe choose a different model or make it more explainable. And then we have TAPNet, which is one of the more recent advances, which combines the best of both worlds. In theory, we're trying this out in production as we speak, but it's still state of the art and not validated yet. So this is all about certain models like LSTMs, convnets, and so on. These are difficult to explain, whereas decision trees, ensembles, and so on, these might be more explainable to use, and TAPNet sits on the top right. So moving forward, a customer case is Accolade Wines. It's a company in the UK that bottles wine, 200 million liters to be exact per year. And they won quite a bit of awards in terms of sustainability. And it's one of the largest companies in the UK in terms of wine bottling. So the challenge they posed upon us is basically, okay, we're losing wine and we don't know where it's being lost. About 1.8 million liters per year. And they actually did not have a clue of when, where, why the wine was being lost. Just a quick heads up about the process. It's actually very straightforward. Wine comes in, it's being stored in tanks, and then through a set of pumps and pipes and valves, it goes to filtration, then to a bottle filler, and to a bottle counter. It's very straightforward. It's not all that difficult, but due to the size of the entire plant, and the amount of pumps and valves and things that are going on, it is quite difficult to see where the actual wine is being lost. So the first thing that we did was, okay, let's get the data. And we immediately hit difficulties because they were using Allen Bradley PLCs and then some custom historians. And there were some difficulties with the local supplier because they didn't want us to give us access, and it was a closed system, and it was a bit of a mess. So we just decided, okay, let's connect on the PLCs and just extract information. Let's push it to the cloud because storage is completely cheap there, and then we'll do whatever we want in the cloud. So we started doing that, and we started to use InfluxDB as a time series database. And basically just to visualize the entire process, because previously they could just see parts of the process. So we visualized the process, and then we implemented very simple logic. So we said, okay, if you look at the production process, if the storage tank is depleting, then surely we would see some fluids coming into the filtration step. If that is not the case, something is going wrong. So that's a very simple rule. which we created, and then based on sensor data, we could basically just show whether or not that was actually the case, and if it's not the case, then this very first line here would pop red. Right? Very simple, very straightforward. Everyone understands it. Everybody happy. So then we applied more advanced methods, and we used actually a paper from the Department of Femke Ongena in UGent, and they are really world class in this. It's about adding semantic databases in production for semantic feedback in combination with anomaly detection and root cause analysis. So we applied that, and what we've done is basically we apply anomaly detection, and we let the system suggest specific rules, and then the operator can say, okay, I'm going to add this to my rule-based, basically to my rules, yes or no. So what happens is that what you can see on the left, we have different rules per startup and mid-run and so on. And the system is actually proposing, maybe you should look at this type of rule because it's an interesting alert. So that is something that has happened in section 7. And in other ones, you could see that it also suggested specific adjustment to existing rules. And if it makes sense, they apply it. If it doesn't make sense, they are going to look a bit further. But the key part here is that if you extend anomaly detection anomaly detection and root cause analysis with a semantic database, it really helps in adoption and explainability as well. So then third part is finding causal effects. And what we typically use all the time is pi causality in combination with Tigramite. Very interesting, and we always combine both of them, and I'll explain why. So pi causality is a Python package which interestingly shows correlation with a time delay. So I know it's correlation, but anyway, what you can see here on the top, it shows basically for a specific sensor value and a specific time delay. At time delay 4, there is something going on. You need to check this. And this is based on transfer entropy, which is from the years 2000, I guess, which is very good. Very robust and has proven to be really useful. But it only takes 2 variables into account, so a sensor value and a time value. Whereas a Tigramite is based on PCMCI, it takes all variables into account. So what it does is basically it creates these causal graphs, which you can see on the bottom here, and it's going to say, okay, the pressure is being influenced by this one, the cell pressure, directly, but it also influences the pressure through this step and through this step, which could include a specific time delay. So that's very interesting because you see much more causal nodes in this graph than just having it in a 2-dimensional system. So why do we use them together? It's because they fundamentally use different methods and they enforce each other. So whatever you see in pi causality and you see it as well in Tigramite, then it's really a signal that you're onto something and it's something to investigate further. So that's really interesting. PCMCI, it's something you can use on your entire data set. It's quite computational heavy. So something that we tend to do as well is that we start with pi causality to filter down on a subpart of the production process to then go full out with Tigramite to find root cause systems. Root cause analysis. So one practical example where we apply this is in a chlorine production process, which is a continuous process, and this was for a manufacturing plant somewhere in the Nordics. I think it was Norway. I can't remember, but they had an issue with a filter building up pressure every couple of months, and they couldn't figure out why this was happening because they didn't have this issue at different plants. So then we started.
Excuse me, Nicolas, for interrupting. So we are running a bit over time, so I don't know how many slides you still have left.
Yes, so thank you for intervening. So I'm not going to continue on this specific example. I'm just going to move a bit faster then. But interestingly here is you can see, for instance, this is our tech radar. And then we show, okay, where did we use Tigramite? Or we used it there. It's in this use case library. It worked there very good. It didn't work there and there and there. It also shows which experts which people are really experts in this. And then it also shows our online documentation portal. And this is something that we provide to external customers as well. So just moving forward, we have transparency and transferability as well. MLMD is all about metadata for your machine learning model. Which data set did the model train on? What were the hyperparameters used? Which pipeline run created the model, and so on. We do data validation streaming, which is something you can see on the right. And then you have TensorFlow model analysis. And this is all about, okay, if you want to transfer your model to a different production line, you can create very specific slices to see your model performance with different environment variables. So you create slice, for instance, for specific SKUs, or you create a slice for a specific region this model has been deployed on, and you can see the difference on how it behaves there specifically. So just being conscious of time, I'm just going to explain one more thing, which is Shapley specific. So Shapley values, if you haven't heard about this, it's really interesting. It's definitely useful if you have a very good and great and strong model, because this is going to show the estimated contribution or attribution from a feature value that deviates the average, that deviates the current predictions from the average prediction. So what you see here is that, okay, in this specific instance, our prediction would be 0.1, but in this specific case, it's 0.4, and we see feature 1 and feature 2 pushing towards the direction of 0.4, and another feature which is pushing back. So one of the examples that I have, and I'm going to do this very, very fast, but we applied this all the time, also in the chlorine production process, but this is an interesting one where we applied this in wind turbines, for wind power output predictions. And just briefly explaining this, you can see here that the normal prediction would be 2.6, but the actual prediction is 5.7. And why? Because the previous power output from the previous timestamp is 5.9, and the actual wind speed now is 10.8, which is quite high. So that's why it pushes to the right, and it's very important. So that's why it's big. But what we've seen is that the wind speed from the previous timestamp is 11.6, which might indicate a decrease in actual wind speed, because now it's a bit lower in the current timestamp. So that's why the model is pushing a bit back. Very interesting, especially because this is just one occasion, but then you can create a plot, which is here on the bottom left, which shows this value for every prediction that the model does. And then you really can see, okay, which one is really pushing for the positive direction, which one is pushing for a negative direction, to provide that explainability. So, and with 1 minute on the clock, I wanted to end with my final slide. So to say thank you. This is just like a very small, this is just lifting the covers of some of the packages that we use. If you want to know more, of the tooling that we use, what did work, what didn't work, if you want to get in touch with some of our customers, if you have similar issues, let me know, we can make that happen. And I'd like to thank you for your attention. Okay, thank you very much, Nicolas. So if no further question, then I would like to thank everybody for your time. Yes, so as mentioned in the beginning, there will be upcoming webinars in the same series, respectively on 6th of May and the 20th of May, where we will share also more, let's say, industrial applications where AI can be used, also inviting other industrial speakers. So you are heartily invited for these webinars, of course. And also we will keep you updated about the other events that are related to the AI in the future. So thank you again for your time and for making it today. And I hope it was this webinar brings you some inspiration on or inspiration about how can you apply AI for your production process optimization. So thank you all again, and have a good day.